BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the program and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Round one tries to test their vocabularies. So for 2 marks, can you give me, please, the meaning of the following words? We begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what's the meaning of Widdershins, or if you prefer it, it can be Widdershins?
Widdershins. Where are your legs going, it means, I think.
Well, not unless you're fairly circular or globular.
Going the wrong way round.
Which way? Yes?
I suppose the right way round was clockwise. Anti-clockwise.
Yes, absolutely right. 2 marks it is. Widdershins means in an anti-clockwise direction. It means contrary to the apparent course of the sun as seen from the Earth. I've never seen the Earth from the sun, so I believe that's quite right. 2 marks.
Water goes down the plug hole.
Only in the northern hemisphere.
I rather think it goes down the plug hole in both hemispheres.
Yes, Widdershins in the south, and the other word, in fact, if you want to know it, is a Scots word called deersill, which means in a sunwise or clockwise direction, which is where water goes in the northern hemisphere.
I could bite my tongue.
Frank Muir, your turn. What's the meaning of embracery?
Embracery?
Mm-hmm.
Embracery. That's part of an emporium where gentlemen were fitted for braces. Or, Edwardian, it was a nook in the conservatory for courting couples.
It's after that's happened and you finish up in court.
What? It's a legal term.
Yes, we don't have much trust in the jury.
It's bribery of the jury.
That's it. I'm going to give you 1 out of 2 because I helped rather a lot. Embracery is the legal offence of trying to bribe or influence by corrupt means a member of a jury so that he delivers a partial rather than an impartial verdict. 1 out of 2. Dilys Powell, what is a treacler? Treacler. Treacler.
Treacler?
It's a French flag.
It's a small animal which climbs up trees.
Now, why would it do that?
To get a treacler.
Because it's a treacler, yes.
It's a nice thought.
It's a chap who manufactures treacle. And defy him. Because he can't say it isn't.
No, he can't, no.
A treacler is a man who makes treacle.
Do you think Frank knows?
Yes,
I think he knows.
Frank is quite right.
Of course I'm right.
I can't say that is an impossible explanation. I'm going to give you 2 marks.
No.
It is normally a vessel or a vat for containing treacle in, but I'll give you your 2 marks.
Yeah.
Now, Denis Norden, what is blobbing? B-L-O-B-B-I-N-G, blobbing.
The trick of this is obviously to come up with something that, though it may not be true, cannot be refuted. And I would say that blobbing is something you do in the underground, on the underground posters where you fill in all the O's, then you fill in the little circles of the P's and the B's, before moving on to the lady's corset.
When do you black out the teeth?
Yes. Well, you black out. But blobbing is filling in. It's a form of doodling which entails putting blobs where there were circles.
Well, again, I'm bound to give you 2 marks because
I think we've got the trick of this.
I can't deny that one possible explanation is making blobs. I hope they won't be the kind that Denis has suggested. But in fact, if you were a fisherman, Denis, which you are not, I think, it means fishing for eels with worms suspended from lengths of worsted thread.
On the other hand, then you wouldn't be able to go around the ladies' corset advertisements in the underground.
That's perfectly true. Well, before we begin the next round, I'm going to read out a phrase for each team to write down, and this week, for a change, we've chosen 2 songs, or phrases from songs, and the 2 women members will go on studying those song phrases, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them what the song is and who wrote it. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "They tried to tell us we're too young." And Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious." And then in the last round, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, the next round is about misquotations. In the quotation I'm going to give, there's only one word which is misquoted. So 1 mark for correcting the misquotation, and 1 mark for naming the source. Anne Scott James, "A sweet disorder in the dress kindles in clothes a waywardness."
Herrick, isn't it?
Yes, Herrick. Yes, that's fine.
Could you say the 2 lines again?
Oh, sorry. "A sweet disorder in the dress kindles in clothes a waywardness."
Wantonness.
A wantonness. Yeah.
It's Robert Herrick, delight in disorder in Hesperides or noble numbers. "A sweet disorder in the dress kindles in clothes a wantonness." Frank Muir, "Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee."
John Donne.
Yes?
Never send to know.
That's right, absolutely right. Well
who the
done,
bell
Frank.
tolls.
2 marks. John Donne. Not in his poetry, but in his devotions.
I actually said there was a New Statesman competition of Clary Hughes, where somebody wrote, Clary Hughes said that Robert was Browning, but John was Donne.
That's right. Now, Denis Powell. "Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its fragrance on the desert air."
It's Gray, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Gray, John Gray.
It's Gray's elegy.
Gray's
That's right.
elegy,
Yes, that's right. 1/2.
Fragrances waste its sweetness.
Yes.
Sweetness.
Well done. Thomas Gray, Elegy in a Country Churchyard. Now, Denis Norden. "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree where Bert the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea."
No, that was Alf, spelled with a PH.
Yes, all right. And author?
Oh, well, that was Coleridge. That was Kubla Khan.
Yes, that's right. 2 marks. Well, now we have a round of differences. I'm giving you pairs of words and asking you to explain the difference, what difference there is, if there's any, in their meanings. And 2 marks again for correct answers. Anne Scott James, the difference between shilly-shally and dilly-dally.
Shilly-shally, that occurs in Lewis Carroll. And he refers to it as which is sort of, there's no humdrum in him, nor any shilly-shally. It means no nonsense in him. Dilly-dally means delay.
Dilly-dally means to leg. You haven't got quite shilly-shally right. I think I'd like to get you your 2 marks.
Yeah, I think you'd say that shilly-shally, there's an element of purposely delaying.
That's right.
Whereas if you dilly-dally, you're dawdling.
Dawdling.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I wanted. 2 marks it is. Shilly-shally, and which is... Shilly-shally is simply a reduplication of shall-I, which means shall-I, shan't-I, as it were. So shilly-shally means to vacillate or to be irresolute or undecided, but dilly-dally means to loiter, to trifle. 2 marks. Frank Muir, hocus pocus and hanky-panky.
Hocus Pocus and Hanky Panky were both virtually the same.
Yes.
They were imposing a trick on people.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Hocus pocus, trickery, deception, sleight of hand. It was a formula in conjuring. You said hocus pocus or abracadabra or whatever it was. And hanky panky is very much the same. Denis Powell, hodgepodge and higgledy-piggledy.
Hodgepodge. Higgledy-piggledy. Higgledy-piggledy means sort of any old way upside down or sideways or backwards or frontwards. And hodgepodge.
A hodgepodge is a
mix-up.
Mixture, that's
yes, mix-up.
Yeah, I'll do. 2 marks. Denis Norden, namby-pamby and niminy-piminy.
Well, namby-pamby is sort of milksop, mother's boy.
Yes.
Insipid, nimini pimini, insofar as it just would be used at all, I think would be also sort of very, very timid with it, very, very cowardly with it.
Slightly more than that, Dennis.
Rather effete, is it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Closer to it.
Nimini pimini, what's the phrase?
Grove in a gallery.
Yes, grove in a gallery, greenery yallery.
That's greenery yallery, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Namby-pamby means weakly sentimental or insipidly pretty or wishy-washy. It can be an adjective or a noun. Nimini-pimini means mincing or affected in speech or manner, or an affected delicacy. 2 marks. Well, now we have a round of royal remarks. Utterances ascribed to English royals in the course of English history or British history. 1 mark for identifying king or queen concerned, and 1 mark for identifying the person of whom the Majesty was speaking. Anne Scott James, he speaks to me as if I was a public meeting.
Oh, that's
Queen Victoria of Gladstone, I would think.
Absolutely right. Queen Victoria speaking of Gladstone, 2 marks. Frank Muir, this man hath the right sow by the ear.
No. Some bore, whoever. Half indicates earlier than Queen Victoria.
Yes.
Henry VIII.
Speaking of... Yes, that's right.
Cranmer.
Yes, Cranmer.
Cranmer.
It's Henry VIII speaking of Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. Dilys Powell, who will free me from this turbulent priest?
Said of Thomas à Becket.
By?
Henry the...
Yes.
Second.
Well done, Dilys.
Part 1.
It's Henry II speaking ill-advisedly about Thomas à Becket. 2 marks. Denis Norden. Oh, he's mad, is he? Then I wish he would bite some other of my generals.
Oh, yes, favourite remark of political writers. And it was said by some king about some general who'd done very well. Now,
True.
You are now going to press me to say which king, which general,
It'd be great help.
which simply shows an obsessive attention to detail, which I can only describe as nimini-pimini.
Well, it wasn't Monty. You've got to go back a bit. And the general had to climb up a very steep cliff in order to do well. If that helps you.
Oh, was it Montcalm? Was it the
other one?
The
Yes,
Heights?
right. Yes, that's right one. But who
The
was...
Heights. General Wolfe.
That's it. And the king?
I don't know. George the something.
Yes.
Yeah? I don't know. It all goes blurry.
1 out of 2. It's George II speaking about General Wolfe, who won the great battle at Quebec, in which he died at the moment of victory over the French general Montcalm. Now we come to the last round, and I go back to the quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme for 2 marks again. Anne Scott James, the origin of yours, please. They tried to tell us we're too young.
Well, I don't really know. But I've had much sort of nudging and tipping from the side, which prompts me to say it might have been sung by Nat Cole.
Yes, that'll do. It was a romantic song written in 1951 by Sylvia D. and Sid Lipman, but popularised by Nat Cole and by Pat Boone. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin, please, of your quotation, which was supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
It's out of Mary Poppins.
Uh-huh. That'll do. Well, now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. Now, back to Denis Norden. They tried to tell us we're too young.
What finally convinced me was an incident that actually happened to a maths master in a school near me. He said to a little boy, "What is half of 38? The little boy thought a bit and said, "It's a small portion of crispy noodles." Well, that to me was the final proof, the conclusive evidence that Chinese restaurants have become an integral part of the British scene. I tell you something, though. Even though there is now hardly a village or a hamlet that doesn't boast its Manchurian candidate, up to last Thursday, I myself had never eaten in one. But I was finally persuaded. Chinese chefs apparently seem to work like the army works. Everything is done by numbers. In fact, I'm told there's a game called Chinese restaurant roulette. Everybody sitting round the table mentions their age, and whatever it is, you order a half portion of it. I wasn't prepared to go that far, so I concentrated on the soups that were being offered on the menu. "Have you thought of anything?" said the lady who was squatting on my right. "Well," I said, there's a soup here called wonton soup. W-O-N-T-O-N. "That's right," she said. Well, I said, "It's occurred to me that wonton spelt backwards is not now. So what say we move on to a wimpy bar?" Well, they wouldn't have it. At any rate, at that moment, the waiter arrived. "Good evening," he said. Now, I won't attempt to reproduce a Chinese accent, mainly because he was a Cypriot. But may I recommend, he said, our egg foo young. We have the prawn egg foo young, the chicken egg foo young, the special egg foo young, and the egg foo young, ha! Do you know, on that final one, I sprang back so abruptly, the bamboo screen went clean over into someone's sweet and sour prawn balls. "Come on," said my host, and he pinned me down with his foot. "You've got to enter into the spirit of this. Look, why don't we all take a half portion of those all round? I'll have the prawn egg foo young, Graham will have the chicken egg foo young, Olive will have the special egg foo young. Now, what are you going to have?" I said with sort of passive dignity, "I will have the cod and chips egg." "If you're having that," they said, "we refuse to be seen even sitting with you." And the rotten devils insisted on moving to another table, leaving me to sit alone, solitary, under a golden dragon for no less than 3.5 hours. Because if you've ever tried eating cod and chips with one chopstick... Ladies and gentlemen, the two most embarrassing situations of my life have both occurred in foreign contexts. The first one was the day I used the gentleman's loo in the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And the second one was that night when, in the words of Nat Cole's lovely song, they tried to sell us egg foo young.
Now we go on to Frank Muir, and you will well remember that his storyline is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
I view tomorrow with mixed feelings. Looking forward to the return of my wife after she's been a week away. Now, the feeling of pleasure and joy at welcoming my wife back is unalloyed. But the mixture comes in with what I've got to do to restore the house before she arrives. And there are 7 things to remember to do. First of all, I've got to get in a huge supply of tin soup. Because if she sees that all the soup has been used, she will know that I've eaten nothing but tin soup, and that'll put our relationship on the wrong level. Because it's terribly important that I establish that I can look after myself. And I must get a cauliflower, because I haven't eaten any vegetables for the last week. I keep saying I'm too busy for things like, much too busy working to bother about things like road safety and vegetables and personal hygiene. And But I thought if I bought a cauliflower tomorrow and sort of shook it about the kitchen, that bits of it will fall off and go under the table. It'll look as though I've had loads of vegetables. And then there's the refrigerator. You see, I found that the refrigerator isn't altogether a good thing. It isn't a very practical thing. So I evolved a system, which is very interesting, of switching the fridge off during the day and just letting it go on during the night, to chill things down. But after a week, the contents of the fridge are kind of rectangular snowballs. And I've got to set all that right tomorrow. And then I need an elastic band because I've done in the vacuum cleaner. I don't know why I did in the vacuum cleaner. I was using a gumboot for kitchen refuse, but mine had a hole in it, and I thought I'd stop up the hole with a mixture of tar and sawdust. So I put the tar and sawdust into a thing called a liquidizer, which is a kind of electric food mixer thing. And I didn't know until I read the instructions afterwards. You should put a lid on it. I was vacuum cleaning the kitchen ceiling, and all this stuff went into the vacuum cleaner. The whole thing jammed. Vacuum cleaner jammed, and the motor went on running, and there's an elastic band thing inside them, and it burnt out. There's a smell of rubber. So I've got to get an elastic band to repair that. And eggs. I've got to get eggs because we've got chickens in an ark in the orchard. We've got 9 chickens in this ark, and I went to feed them the first night actually, and I thought they were rather sort of reproachful. So I let them out, and they didn't lay after that. And they haven't laid the whole week, you see. So my wife will be expecting about 24 beige eggs. We haven't got any. So I must get some beige eggs tomorrow to overcome that little trouble. And then I decided to, when I was having my omelette in my soup tin, that I'd put peas in it for a change. And I got a pack of frozen peas, and it said you can chop off how much you want. So I gave the thing a blow with a hammer, and one frozen pea detached itself and ricocheted off my knee and disappeared. And my Afghan puppy was next to me, and I think it went into her ear. I must take her to the vet to see, in fact, the poor thing has got a pea lodged in her ear. And there must be something about my breath, because I'd lost the salt. I thought the salt was in the cocoa tin marked rice, but it wasn't there at all. So I used another sort of weird-shaped salt thing, which was garlic salt. I didn't realise my breath was so bad until this evening when I was leaning up against the door talking to the producer, and the varnish bubbled. So I've got these 7 things to think of tomorrow, you see. I've got to get some tin soup, got to get a cauliflower, got to see about the refrigerator, elastic band for the vacuum cleaner, got to get some eggs, see about the pea in the dog's ear, and do something about my bad breath. Now, I bet some of you are saying, how could he remember all those 7 things? How could he remember? But it's quite simple, because I make a kind of chant. I've just been saying to myself all day, super collie, fridge elastic, eggs, P. halitosis.
Well, one thing is quite certain. Frank's nice wife, Polly, will never go away on holiday again. By your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the story contest, and he and his teammate, Dilys Powell, also win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The program was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC. BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the program and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. A roundabout vocabularies. For 2 marks, can you give me the meaning of the following words? We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is a nuncheon, or just nuncheon?
It's lunch in a convent.
Well, we're getting very close. Not far wrong.
Not far wrong.
I'd leave the convent out.
It's a meal, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
I think it's a meal.
Yep.
It's a meal.
Yes,
it's a meal.
That'll about do. It's light refreshment of liquor and possibly other things as well, taken between meals, usually in the afternoon.
Really?
And it
Never do that.
meant it was a Middle English word meaning noon draught. But if you remember your Pied Piper, so munch on, crunch on, take your nunch on, breakfast, supper, dinner, lunch on. But the rats. All right, I'll give you your 2. Denis Norden, what is a McNinny? M-A-C-K-N-I-N-N-Y. McNinny.
Well, it's the Scottish term for Ethelred the Unready. Or it's any form of timid Scotsman who won't wear a fringe on his sporran. Or if he does, wears it on the inside. I presume it is a Scottish word. I'm basing all my assumptions on it. So.
Yes, but you've got to make it a little less than human.
It has no connection with what one would think.
It's a theatrical term, Dennis, but rather very, very much smaller than the ordinary theatre.
It's a stall or booth that they use.
Yes? And who do you see if you go and watch something in a booth like that?
Punch and Judy.
Yeah, that'll do. 1.5. It's a puppet show, just as Punch and Judy is a puppet show. Anne Scott James, what is a jokey? J-O-K-E-E. Jokey.
It's a Chinese witticism.
I
can do it too when I really try.
That'll very nearly do, Anne, but if you remember the difference between active and passive, you'll get there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is the
Don't you
person
laugh.
on whom the joke is played. This is the recipient of some ghastly practical joke.
That's it. Absolutely right. 2 marks. And Frank Muir, finally, what is a moxa? M-O-X-A.
Moxa.
It's poisonous.
It would be if you ate it, I think.
Toxic,
Yes,
as in moxic.
Toxic.
Moxa.
But
It's
how would you use this?
How do you use it? Very carefully. Don't drop it into your porridge.
No, I wouldn't.
Ah, no, you must avoid doing it.
Now, Frank, you've got gout. And what would you do?
I'd stuff a pillow with finest down,
That's it.
put my gouty foot up on it, and reckon the whole household would revolve round.
1 mark for getting as near as you can. It's down, and the down was right, from the dried leaves of a plant. And it's normally a plant called Artemisia moxa, which is wormwood, used for burning on the skin as a counter-irritant for gout. You're being hurt like anything, and therefore you put this thing on which burns you and burns you, but it's less bad than the gout. In other words, a kind of hot poultice. Well, before we begin the next round, I'm going to read out a quotation for the teams to write down, and the 2 women members, I hope, will go on studying the quotations, because at the end I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "If music be the food of love, play on." And Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, "Charity shall cover the multitude of sins." And then in the last round, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Round 2 is a round of differences. I'm giving you pairs of words, and want you to explain the difference in their meanings. 2 marks again for correct answers. Dennis Powell, piebald and skewbald.
Both apply to horses.
Yes, they mostly do. They needn't.
Piebald means a horse, well, it means something. It's not a horse, which I believe is sort of black and white.
Right, quite right.
And skewbald
Yes.
means not black and white, but perhaps brown and white, or
Yes.
grey and white, or lots of things in white, but not black and white.
Well done. Well done. Denis Norden, prone and supine.
Oh, yeah. Now, wait a minute. You have to know this if you're packing sardines. Because one means onwards and one means lying face upwards. Now, wait a minute. Prone is lying face upwards and supine is lying face downwards.
You're just 180 degrees wrong.
Then it's the other way around.
Flatten your face or flatten your back.
It makes it very difficult to mark you. One I'll give you. 1 out of 2. Prone is lying horizontally but face downwards. And can be used loosely for lying flat, prostrate, without bothering which way up you happen to be. Supine is horizontal face upwards. It also means very disinclined for exertion, somewhat indolent or lethargic. 1 out of 2.
Dennis is right as far as our Australian listeners are concerned.
And Scott James, flotsam and jetsam.
Dear.
One sings the high notes, one sings the low.
One's what?
One sings the high notes, one sings the low.
Now, one is something which is thrown up on the beach. They're both forms of pollution. Are we clear about this?
If you like.
Rather attractive.
One is the orange peel which floats around the middle of the sea, and the other's the tar which is thrown up on the beach.
Which is which?
Oh, the jetsam's the stuff which is thrown up on the beach.
Yes. Jetsam is goods or cargo usually thrown out of a ship in order to lighten it, because otherwise it might sink, and usually means thrown up on the beach after it's floated underwater, presumably, out of the ship. And flotsam and jetsam together mean any unclaimed odds and ends that one goes and finds very pleasantly on a beach. Frank Muir, spick and span.
Spick and span means very neat and orderly and undirtied.
What?
I don't know any other meaning of spick.
Spick is much what it sounds like. It means a spike or a nail. And span is a small piece of wood, a little chip off the block. And spick and span is all spick and span new, looking terribly neat and fine. Well, now we have a round of origins and derivations. These are everyday words in common or not so common usage. I want original meanings and how they came to be formed. Again, 2 marks for correct answers. Dilys Powell, your word is plantagenet.
It's a plant.
Yes.
It's a broom.
That's quite right, yeah.
It's a broom plant.
Yeah, and
Like
who
Erica,
did it refer to? No, Erica is a heather.
It referred to a royal family. Henry the First, that kind.
Yes, you're not at all far wrong. Have another shot and I'll give you a mark. Not Henry the First.
No, Henry the Second.
All right. 2 marks. Plantagenet comes from Plantagenesta, which is the broom plant. It was the family emblem or cognizance of Geoffrey, Count of Anjou, who was the father of Henry II, and the Plantagenets are generally reckoned as lasting from Henry II to Richard II, when the House of Lancaster, House of York, other Wars of the Roses took over. Denis Norden, constable.
Well, that goes back... It goes back to Henry V. There's the Constable of France,
yes,
is in Henry V. So,
okay.
so we can push it back that far.
Yes, and what was he?
Well, he was a very high dignitary. Well, he was a...
3-day events and things like that.
Oh, he won a gymnaca. Wearing jodhoppers.
Oh, he ran the tour.
He ran the Horse of the Year show in France.
Yes, 1.5. It comes from Latin, come stabuli, which means count of the stable, or, if you like, master of the horse. And he was the principal household officer of the Frankish kings in early days in France, responsible not only for the horses, but for discipline, and he was commander-in-chief under the king, and everything to do with chivalry. And we had one like this in England called Constable of England, or Lord High Constable, but he forfeited his office for some reason or other in 1521, and since then we've only appointed him from time to time, odd times, like coronations. Anne Scott James, bonfire.
Something bon or good. No?
That won't help you much.
It won't.
Think what you might have made a fire from.
Ah.
Kindling wood.
No.
Let's make a fire from.
Before there were slaughterhouses.
Good heavens.
Good.
Bones.
Bones.
Yes.
You think so?
Yeah.
It's
It's a fire made of bones, actually.
Yes, that's it. That's all I wanted. Yes. The bonfire was originally bone fire, a fire made of bones, and because they hadn't got anywhere particular else to put them, until about the 16th century, the bones of oxen and sheep were all brought together and burnt in a public place. And then rather nastily, it became a fire in which you burned heretics or banned books that you didn't want anybody to read. And only later after that was it the sort of fire that you had on anniversaries.
How did they get the bones to burn? Because if you grill a chop and you go away and you forget about it, you come back and all the meat's gone and the bone's still there.
They had witches who helped.
Yeah.
Too much. Frank Muir, Daisy.
Is upsy daisy. The sort of thing you say when handing a lady onto the front half of a tandem. It's I do know a yarn about this, which I don't believe for one moment. It's sort of opposite of the deadly nightshade.
Yes.
It comes from the day's eye.
Yes, that's what I wanted.
Which I'm sure is absolutely
Don't go
not
on.
true.
Stop.
Daisy did simply come from that. Day's eye, its original name, because of its habit of opening up in the morning and shutting its petals at sunset, which you can see and watch it doing. That's it, 2 marks. Well, now's the last round. And I go back to those quotations I gave the teams earlier in the program. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? If music be the food of love, play on.
It's Shakespeare.
Yeah.
It's Twelfth Night. And it's, I think, the first line.
First line it is, 2 marks. And Anne Scott James, the origin of your quotation, please. Charity shall cover the multitude of sins.
Well, I think it's from the New Testament.
Yes, 2 marks. And now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their improbable explanations of how these came to be said or written. And for this round, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir. If music be the food of love, play on.
Coming down this morning, I found an extra heavy male on the doormat. He's about 16 stone. He said, I'm the new postman. And he gave me 2 letters. And I think these 2 letters are rather indicative of the sort of letters we get on this program. Both of these letters asked for advice. The first one said, Dear Mr. Moyer, you often talk on this program about your Afghan puppies, and I wonder whether you can advise me, because my Afghan puppy chews absolutely everything. The corners of cushions, the chairs. If I'm doing some needlework, she chews that. And even if I write a letter, she... That's as far as the letter went. The second one was really rather moving. It said, Dear Mr. Muir, forgive me writing to you as a perfect stranger, but if I may give you the salient facts of my life, it might help you to come to a decision. I'm not a privileged person, Mr. Muir. I had a rather unfortunate upbringing. I come of mixed parentage, one male and one female. As I grew up, neither of my parents spoke to me, Mr. Muir. Not as to a child, the truth to tell was they didn't want a child at all. They wanted a sheepdog. As the years advanced, I grew used to the collar, and I'm rather ugly, Mr. Muir, and if I ask a girl to go out, she goes, ha, ha, ha. So I've turned against the world, Mr. Muir, and I am now plying the trade of UDI. Uncivil, disobedience, instigator. I plan to cause disruption wherever my feet lead me. Now, you see, if I go into a post office and I see the telegraph forms there and it says take one, Mr. Muir, I take two. Whenever I get a form, Mr. Muir, which says on it, do not write anything in this space. In the space, I write anything. Some of the forms they send don't say that. Some of the government forms, they just say, do not write in this space. Reserved for office use only. And when I get that, Mr. Muir, I rub a candle over that bit. Last week I branched out, Mr. Muir, to my new thing, which is to obey things and not disobey them. I had an invitation from our new chairman of the Egham Urban District Council, because he holds a big ball in the town hall in his year of office, and he invited me, and I went. But at the bottom of the invitation it said, dress, black tie only. My case comes up on Thursday. Mr. Muir, tell me, Mr. Muir, am I wrong? Am I doing wrong? Just because nobody loves me, have I the right to ply my trade of mucking up important people? Please advise me. Yours faithfully, Ferdinand McHugh Sigby. It's the most moving letter I've ever had. I can only say, you're doing marvellous, grand work, sir. And in the words of Shakespeare, I would say, F. McHugh Sigby, devoid of love, ply on.
Well, I doubt if they'll ever play Twelfth Night again. We'll go on to Denis Norden. And if you remember, his quotation was, charity shall cover a multitude of sins.
I happened to drop into my club last week. It's the Odeon Saturday Morning Club. I try to get in there at least once a month. And it was while the adverts were on, I got chatting to the bloke sitting next to me, and he made a comment about the way that I tell these stories on my word. He said, do you realize you have a very slow delivery? That's a very disconcerting thing to be told, you know, that you've got a very slow delivery. It makes you feel like a delinquent laundryman or an inexperienced gynecologist. In fact, there was only one thing that saved this chap from getting the unexpired portion of my popcorn right down his mush, and that was that I happened to know what he said was true. But it is not my fault. Let me tell you what happened. On my 40th birthday, I had a terrible thing happen to me. Some chemical change took place in my, if you'll pardon the frankness of the word, body. I don't know what it was, but just suddenly the very minimum of alcohol became enough to start me yodeling. I can recall the very occasion when the change happened. It was somebody's engagement party, and all they were serving was this very mild, what you might call twiggy champagne. You know, sweet but flat. I'd only drunk 2 sips, just 2 sips, and suddenly I found myself trying to dial the Gruyere cheese. Now, isn't it terrible to be struck down like that in the prime of life, overnight to become a secret non-drinker? You see, but this is the awful part. It coincided exactly with the 10th year of the My Word series. Now, I must explain the significance of that. You see, once a radio series has been on for 10 years, it qualifies for what the BBC calls hospitality. There I was, suddenly eligible for BBC drinks, but just as suddenly physically unsuited to accept them. Well, you might say, why didn't you just give your gin to one of the other participants on the programme? Well, that's a good question. But the point is, which one? You see, certainly neither Dilys nor Anne. These ladies are both newspaper women. Tough, cynical, suspicious lady columnists, you see. And in their eyes, any man who offers them spare gins is only after one thing. And Jack Longland, why don't I give it to Jack Longland? Well, that would not be right to give him more drink, because he drives his wife all the way back to Derbyshire after every programme, and it really is tough enough having to tackle those motorways with somebody sitting on the crossbar. Then that leaves Frank. Frank, why don't I give him to Frank? Well, look, I know Frank's alcoholic reactions as well as I know my own. I do assure you, when he comes on here, he's already right at the frontier of his capacity. One more gin and he'd be rolling up his trouser leg and putting on Dilys's hat. So, for the sake of the team, for the sake of the programme, I have to swallow those gins myself, even though doing so means every show I do with my upper lip numb and that feeling that your tongue has grown too big for the inside of your mouth. You know that feeling. But that is why I have got what this chap called a slow delivery. Because the only way I can disguise the effects of more alcohol than my body can now take is to articulate every word very slowly, very clearly, in the hope that, as the good book almost says, clarity shall cover the multitude of gins.
Well, I don't mind him libeling the team, but Denis libeled even himself in that story. Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir wins the story contest, and he and Dilys Powell also win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. First, a vocabulary round. 2 marks if you can tell me the meaning of the following words. Anne Scott James, what is a patty pan?
Oh, the pie and the patty pan.
Yes, that's what I wanted.
Was one of Beatrix Potter's books.
Yes.
Well, we know what a pie is. So a patty pan is a little thing in which you, a little cooking utensil.
It is, but does your dough ever sort of sink into the middle of the pie when you're cooking?
Oh, no, not mine. I make sure it rises properly.
All right, 2 it is. Patty pan is, for most people, a pan for cooking patties in, but as Anne mentioned Beatrix Potter's story, The Pie and the Patty Pan, I've got to quote Beatrix Potter. I put in a little tin patty pan to hold up the crust. It's that little upside-down egg cup.
I always use an egg cup.
That you put in the middle in order that the crust doesn't go down, zonk, into the goo. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a poor beagle? P-O-R-B-E-A, just like beagle. Poor beagle.
Not an underprivileged hound.
I got
was not allowed to be in at the kill. I know this.
Yeah.
It's a shark.
Mm-hmm. What kind of shark?
It's it's seen off Cornwall.
Yes.
So it's a basking shark, presumably.
No, but it's seen off Cornwall. All right. Yes, that's good enough. It's a thing I think called the mackerel shark, which is about 10 feet long, which is pretty alarming, and with a snout, a rather extended snout. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, what's the meaning of the word spelt? U-N-K-I-N-G. U-N-K-I-N-G. What does that mean?
Unking. Oh, well, to cut the head off a royal personage.
That would be a bit unkind as well as unking.
It is unkind.
Any other way of doing it?
Well,
Squatting down.
dethrone. To
Yeah.
dethrone.
That's it. That's what I wanted. 2. Unking means... Unking means dethrone, to cause to abdicate, or to deprive a country of a king, like unhorse, meaning taking the horse away from the chap. Now, Denis Norden, what's the meaning of the word, and it's adopted from a French word, couvade, C-O-U-V-A-D-E, couvade?
Yes, I know this. Actually, my dentist told me about this, because it is a dentistry thing. Actually, when dentists tell you something, you're apt to take it in because you can't really introduce... But apparently, and the dentists do get lots of cases of this, that it's generally among fairly newly married couples, not that newly married, that when the wife is pregnant, and particularly when she's getting labour pains, the husband gets a sort of sympathetic toothache. This is apparently quite true. And what he said was interesting is it doesn't work the other way round. In other words, if the husband has something wrong with him, you don't get the wives trotting along with toothache. And that's called couvade.
Absolutely right, Dennis. 2 marks.
Brilliant.
It's sort of faintly interesting that in Corsica, when a woman is having a baby, that the husband is cosseted.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
For exactly the same reason.
This is couvade, that's it. Yeah, absolutely right. Well, before we begin the next round, I read out a quotation for each team to write down, and I hope the 2 women members will study them, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, yours is, there is no accounting for taste. And Dilys Powell and Frank, yours is, parting is such sweet sorrow. And in the last round I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, now a round of unfamiliar phrases which were once commonly heard and nowadays probably not so. 1 mark for explaining the meaning, and a 2nd mark if you can put it into context. I'm given an example of the correct use of it. Anne Scott James, the black ox has trodden on your foot.
Well, it's a very painful thing to happen.
Sure.
And unlucky, too.
Unlucky, yes.
Yes, and...
Comes from?
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like one of those things that spies greet each other with.
It comes from witchcraft, I would think.
A man will say to you, the black ox has trodden on your foot.
It's sort of
and you will say...
John Buckenish.
Yes.
That's right, yeah. Can you derive it from anything a bit earlier than that, Anne?
Perhaps it's a Latin.
Yes, it goes back certainly to that. Yes. I think I'm being a bit unfair. We'll settle for 1.5. It means you've been unlucky, that misfortune has come your way. It can mean for men that you're just being henpecked. But it's the black ox, which was sacrificed to the god of the underworld, Pluto, and therefore infernal happenings were all around you. Frank Muir, to stand upon one's pantoffles, P-A-N-T-O-F-L-E-S, or if you prefer it, it can be pantables.
Yeah.
Pantoffles or pantables?
It's a slipper.
Yes.
But a special form of slipper, hence the expression. Rather like the shoes that the ladies wore in Venice to keep them off the mud.
And therefore the phrase means what, Frank? To stand upon your pantoffles?
To stand on your pentable,
or pentable,
as I know it, means to stand on your dignity. Because
absolutely
you're
right.
Higher. You know, you can sort of rear up and sneer at people lower than you.
Well, Frank, 3 marks for special erudition this time, because you've got the 2 points. In this phrase, to stand on your pantoffles or pantables, it's probably the high cork shoes, known as pantoffles, which actors used to make them seem even taller and grander than they were, add dignity to their performance. But it also was the loose slippers worn by Orientals. Same word, and you've got both of those. 3 marks. Dilys Powell, out of all scotch and notch.
It means you haven't got any whiskey in the house.
That would be notch. Not notch.
And no nosh either, no.
Is it nautical?
No.
Not nautical.
No.
Means out of all knowledge.
Yes, no, not far from that.
Near enough.
It means beyond all bounds, beyond the limits. The scotch is a line marked on the ground, for instance, in games children play, like hopscotch, or it can be a scratch or incision, and literally a score, which is something that you score across something else. The notch is a nick or a mark for keeping a score or keeping a record. Denis Norden, all the traces have the wind in their faces, and the traces got a capital T, and it's T-R-A-C-Y-S. All the traces have the wind in their faces.
I think that's what you reply when a spy says to you, the black ox has trodden on your foot. You say, all the traces have the wind in their face. He then hands over the plans.
He might well, because it's a kind of curse.
Is it? I think what they did was when they were sitting round the dining table, they never put their hand up in front of their mouths when they should do. So all of them had the wind in their face. I don't think I'm going to get this by any process of logical deduction. I think I have to make some kind of imaginative leap, which I don't feel is in me.
There were 4 chaps who murdered an Archbishop.
Are we talking about Thomas a Becket or something?
Yes, we are. Yes, that's what we're talking about. Those who do wrong will get their deserts. And it was William de Tracy who was perhaps the nastiest and most active of the knights who assassinated the Archbishop Thomas a Becket. And for centuries afterwards, they were saddled with this curse: wherever by land or sea they go, forever the wind in their faces shall blow. Now a round which the compiler has labelled rather learnedly etymological imports, which means words filched from other languages and then later incorporated into the English language. 2 marks. I want you to tell me the language or country of origin, and a consolation mark if you get it in the right continent and not quite so clear about the actual country. Anne Scott James, bosh. And I mean by this nonsense. Bosh.
Should we try for the continent first?
Yes, try the continent first.
Europe.
No.
America. Australia. Asia.
Asia.
Asia, of course it is, like Tarbush. It's one of
That's
those...
right, you're getting near it.
Yeah.
Oh, Persian.
You're so near there, I'll give you 1.5.
Turkish.
Yes, that's it. But I did give you lots of chances.
Turkey and...
That's right, it is Turkish. In the Turkish language, bosh means empty, worthless, so on. And that crept into the English language and bosh turned up all over the place. Now, Frank Muir, ketchup. As in the phrase tomato ketchup.
Ketchup is stuff very closely resembling, both in appearance and taste, red lead. It's a sort of squashed up puree of tomato, also called catsup.
Yes, and derives from?
I associate it with America, and I would very strongly suspect that, like...
But when Columbus got to America, where did he think he got to?
Isle of Wight. Well, he was aiming for the Indies.
And beyond, really.
Yes, well, he was hoping to get around the world, wasn't he?
That's right. So I wanted. It derives from the Chinese.
Chinese?
Koi chap, which is a brine of pickled fish. Dilys Powell, your turn. Slogan.
Slogan. Scottish.
Yes.
Scottish.
Which language?
Gaelic.
Yes, what I wanted. Yes. Do you know what it means?
Originally?
Mm-hmm.
It means a war cry.
Absolutely right. Well
it doesn't.
In Gaelic, it means an army cry or a war cry, and hence a party cry, a motto, and later a catchphrase, in case of a word going downhill. 2 marks. Denis Norden, booby. I mean, in the sense of silly ass or fool. Booby. Country of origin.
Booby. Looks vaguely Asian.
That's Fernando Po, in fact. They had people called boobies. Now, get a bit south of the Pyrenees, that'll help.
Awful at
South of the Pyrenees, come on, that leaves Spain and Portugal, dear.
Yes. It's Spanish. A Spanish word bobo, meaning a fool, a lubberly lout, the boy at the bottom of the class. And there's also a seabird of the gannet tribe, which is absurdly easy to catch, and so stupid, it's called a booby, too. Well, now we come to the last round. And I go back to those quotations I gave the teams earlier in the program. 2 marks, Anne Scott James. The origin of yours, please. There is no accounting for taste.
Well, I think it's a proverb.
Put it into another language and I'll give you 2 marks.
I think it's a Latin proverb.
Yes. Do you remember what the Latin was?
It's de something or other, known as disputandum.
Yeah, that's good enough.
De
Gustibus.
Yes.
gustibus, we think.
De gustibus, known as disputandum. There is no accounting for taste. A Latin proverb. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of yours. Parting is such sweet sorrow.
Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Juliet speaking.
Quite right. It's in the end of the balcony scene, and Romeo has to go back home. Parting is such sweet sorrow. Shakespeare. Well, now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir. His was, parting is such sweet sorrow.
I was walking the other evening in a little lane between Greek Street and Dean Street in Soho. It was in the evening, about 7 o'clock. And I came across a lady lying in the gutter, also quite near the gutter. She had on, as I recall, I haven't much an eye for these things, but a dark brown velvet long dress. She was clutching a handbag. She had silver shoes, silver hair, silver sort of blue hair, and she was looking at the stars. So I said, Madam, are you going to have a come-over? And she said, rather coolly, no, I'm going to the theatre. So I said, well, why are you supine? And she said, I'm reserving a place for my husband to park the rolls. mention this because it ties in with a letter I had from a fan of this programme, Mr. Herbert Derwent of Durinallum, Western District, Victoria, Australia, who's coming back to England after nearly 20 years. He told me about this and said he'd like to come along and see the show. And he said, and he told me all about his details of his trip, and he was thinking of hiring a car. And is it easy to park a car in London? Well, it's not all that difficult. I mean, there's nothing illegal about parking a car in London. You know, it's as open to anybody as landing a Boeing 747 in Cricklewood Broadway. There are difficulties, Mr. Derwent, there are difficulties. There's a sort of system you have to get used to, which people who are strange to London don't usually get used to very quickly. There was an American tourist who was asking an Irish traffic warden about these things and said, what does the yellow line mean? And the traffic warden said, it means you can't park at all. So I said, well, what's the meaning of two yellow lines? There's a slight pause, and the Irish traffic warden said, it means, sir, you can't park at all. Generally speaking, Mr. Derwent, when you come over here, you'll find that the parking meters that you have to park up against. The normal drill is to cruise gently around until you find an empty space, an empty parking meter, whereupon the car in front of you goes into it. So what I want to say, Mr. Derwent, is if you come to London, don't really reckon on car parking, because finding a space in London is, well, in Shakespeare's words, parking is search, sweat, sorrow.
When we come to Denis, there is no accounting for taste.
I was told about a London schoolboy whose teacher asked him to give an example of pop art. And he said, an electric toaster. And when the teacher looked puzzled, he said, because if you put a piece of bread in it and you wait a couple of minutes, you'll see it pop art. The burden of my story is that is exactly what was not happening with my electric toaster. And as a consequence, my whole day was being ruined. You see, I come from a family whose firmest belief is that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Anyway, you can now appreciate why the mechanical failure of my electric toaster cast a blight over the whole day. The bread was not popping up at all. It just sat inside. The only way to judge how much it was toasted was by decoding the smoke signals it sent. In other words, a small bluish wisp meant a sort of ginger-coloured. Black billowing puffs get the butter knife ready to start scraping. Well, after a fortnight or so of ruined and charcoal-tasting slices, I realized there was nothing for it. I just have to take the appliance to be seen to. Now, in our modern technological society, there's only one type of man who laughs when things go wrong. That's the man who gets paid for repairing the thing that's gone wrong. In my case, it's a chap we used to call the little man at the electrical shop. He's now referred to as that gentleman who owns the big house with the double garage. So I booked an appointment with him, and I trudged round with the toaster. And sorry, he called out. The minute I set foot in the door, sorry, he said, I can't touch a thing before Christmas. This was New Year's Day. I said, if you'll just advise me So he said, all right. He said, what's the problem? I said, my popper is not working. He said, well, as long as your mum's got a job. Now, there is an old Polish proverb to the effect, there is nothing so funny as a rich man's joke. So obediently I rolled about and gasped for breath and slapped my thigh for a few minutes, after which he consented to examine the toaster. Finally, after looking at it, he said, the spring has lost its tension. Leave it here. I'll let you have it back as soon as I get round to it. Which turned out to be 8 months. 8 months, during which my time was spent either burning the toast beyond all redemption under the grill, or wasting half the morning trying to brown it on the immersion heat. But finally we got the toaster back, and the following morning, feeling very cheerful, I put a piece of bread into it, reached for the newspaper, and I'd only just begun to unfold it when, plump, there was the toast, up on the ceiling. Whatever he'd done to the tension of the spring, obviously he'd now done it too much. And what finalised my decision to take the darn thing back was when a friend who was staying with us just happened to bend over the toaster while reaching for the cornflakes. Well, now, personally, I think he now looks rather dashing with an eye patch. But his insurance assessor's not having it at all. So back to the shop I went. And this time it took 10 months, because the man in the electric shop said he had some kind of staff trouble. Apparently the crew on his yacht had mutinied. Anyway, it meant another lengthy stretch of ruined breakfast and battered and blackened toast slices. But when the toaster came back this time, you can be absolutely certain we treated it very warily. After inserting the bread, we stood well back. But thank heaven, there was no more of this sort of mortar gun action. After the required 2 minutes, the bread just slipped up and stayed solid and secure in its slot. The only thing was, it wasn't toast. Not the slightest tinge of that lovely gold colour. It just pure, unsullied white. And what made this so peculiarly depressing was that it was a piece of brown bread. So, of course, I am now suing. I'm putting in an account for 18 months of ruined mornings, an account for a complete repaint job on the ceiling, an account for doctor's bills and damages for my one-eyed friend. And if that chap in the shop quibbles, I shall point out to him that I haven't also included the price of all those blackened and wasted slices of bread. Or as the old Romans used to say, there is no account in for toast.
Well, I'm sure entirely true. Now, by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, but nevertheless, for the entire contest as a whole, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir win that, and this brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.
My Word. It's my music. A special Christmas edition of the two well-known radio panel games devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason. And here to introduce the teams are Jack Longland and Steve Race.
My Words is a panel game played by people whose business is words. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir.
To whom, on this occasion, we add from My Music, Ian Wallace and David Franklin. And it's music first. In this first festive round, we have music of various kinds. So turning first to the three on my right, that's Ian Wallace, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden. I ask you, Ian, first, to listen to this with a question to follow. Lovely start to a programme. The start of Who's What and when was it written, Ian?
Bach's Christmas Oratorio.
Yes, but you're not so sound on years, usually, are you?
No, I'm not at all sound on years. 17...
Yes, well done. Almost. Yes. 17...
Thank you for that vote of confidence so early in the evening.
17 Thrumpty Thrump.
Yes. 30...
Yes.
4.
Yes, no, I mean, you're within 1,000 years either way. The start of Bach's Christmas Oratorio, 1734 would have been the year, and you have 3 marks out of 3, Ian. Well done.
Oh, Christmas.
And Scott James, how nice to be talking to you at last. 2 titles for this, please, and the composer's name.
Christmas Holiday.
Well, it's a country dance song of Greensleeves.
Yes, that's one title. Good.
The other one it's one of the songs from the St. Paul's Suite.
Yes.
Which I do know because that was my school. The composer of what? The original Greensleeves composer?
Well, no, we're not too sure about that, any of us.
Anon.
No, the composer of the St. Paul's
Gustav
Suite.
Holst.
Gustav Holst, who taught music at your old school.
Yes, and indeed, I'm sorry to say it shows how old I am, that I remember him very, very well. He was an absolutely super and marvellous person.
Oh, how nice.
Although he was a very famous composer then. He knew us all by name and what we were up to.
How lovely.
I thought St. Paul's was a boys' school.
Oh, really? No, really? For goodness sake. We've been there since 1901 or that.
They found out during the swimming competitions.
So word will get about now that Anne Scott James was at St. Paul's Girls' School when Greensleeves was written. I don't know. You've got 3, Anne, out of 3. Good start. Denis Norden, a snatch of dialogue first, and then a question.
This is living. This is style. This is elegance by the mile.
Denis, what is and who said so in which film?
Isn't it terrible after all this display of public school erudition? This is living, this is style. I don't know.
Recognise the voice?
No, I don't. It's somebody who was rather straining rather a bit to get up there.
Well, you could call him more of an actor than a singer, that's true.
No, I don't. I really don't know, Steve.
It's a song about which side of the ship you're on when you go sailing or cruising.
Posh.
That much help. Yes. Now, work it out from there and get 2.5 out of 3.
What's that? A song about Posh. Does Posh come in the title?
Yes, you've got half of
on the
the
pop
marks of
side
that.
or something, isn't it?
Do you know the singer and the film?
Posh is posh.
Posh.
Posh. No, I don't know that. I've never heard it.
Bald-headed actor, isn't it? David Franklin.
Jeanette MacDonald.
English.
No.
Oh, not the one who used to act with Ray Blinn, not him.
No,
not
did the sequence.
Not as far back as Tom was. I really can't wait any longer. The film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Lionel Jeffries.
Yes, that's the one.
And Dennis, I think you'll be happy with half a mark, won't you?
Right. Yeah. I'll be ecstatic with half.
David Franklin, for you some music that's rather appropriate around this time. David, whose music, who commissioned it, and which tune is it based on?
Stravinsky.
Yes, that's right. Who commissioned it?
Barnum and Bailey.
Thank you, yes.
And it's the Dance of the Circus Elephants.
Yes, 1942, and it was based on, for your third mark...
This always astonishes me, because I think it's very difficult to hear this tune in it, at least in that bit of it. It's Schubert's Marche Militaire.
Yes.
I only knew it because I once had to introduce it in a radio programme.
As long as you never have to introduce it in a circus, you'll be all right. Yeah. 3 out of 3 for David Franklin. Dilys, I want from you, please, the singer, the name of the film, and the name of the composer.
Non, je ne pourrai jamais vivre sans toi. Je ne pourrai pas, ne pars pas, j'en mourrai.
It's Les Parapluies de Cherbourg.
Yes, that's the film.
By Michel Legrand.
Yes, that's the composer and the singer.
Well, is it really Catherine Deneuve isn't singing, is she?
No.
Oh, dear.
Shall we ask the audience? Yes, it was indeed. I think 2 out of 3 would be fair, wouldn't it? It was Nana Mouskouri singing in French, just to put you off the scent. Correct. Frank, an operatic excerpt for you with a question. Now, Frank, having heard that, and I hope placed it, doesn't really matter, for your 3 marks, can you tell me 3 things that Angelina had that Clorinda and Tisby didn't have?
Well, if Clorinda and Tisby were men, I could name... No. She was visibly standing on a loose floorboard. That's a part of the piece.
Approach it via Clorinda and Tisby. Do you know who they are?
Cloris and...
Close relatives, I may say. And not very good looking either.
Ugly sisters.
Now, work it out.
The word is Cinderella.
Yes.
What?
Cenerentola.
Yes, it was
It's a Cenerentola scene.
It was an excerpt from La Cenerentola by...
A Cenerentola by Rossini.
The question was 3 things they had that Angelina had that they didn't.
Beauty.
Yes.
Small feet. And Prince Charles.
Yes, the Prince, Don Ramiro in the opera. Fair enough, you get 3 eventually, Frank. No. End the first round, and here's Jack Longland.
Well, we go...
With an inter-round summary.
It's a case of a game little and against a game big and...
Somebody said somewhere the rest is prose, and this round is to test the vocabularies of the members of the 2 teams. 2 marks if they get answers right. Most of the words are newish words, and some may possibly be with it. We begin with Ian Wallace. Ian, the word is camp, as an adjective.
I'm glad you asked me that. Because maybe I shall get a little enlightenment. I have known this word as an adjective for my entire time in the theatrical profession, if indeed I can call myself a member of the theatrical profession. I've never quite known what it meant because it seems to cover a very wide variety. It is used to describe the appearance of members of both sexes when dressed in certain ways. You will hear chorus girls describe another chorus girl who comes in dressed in a rather outrageous fashion as a camp aider.
That's absolutely dead right. It means theatrical, affected, exaggerated, with overtones of homosexuality, and if it's high camp, it's deliberate extravagance of manner, perhaps without being fully aware of the effect of what you're doing. Camp, 2 marks. Anne Scott James, charisma.
Well, this word, although it's a very old Greek word, it sort of first came into one's life with President Kennedy. The Americans have gone mad for it. But it really means grace and a graceful and charming way of living and attitude to life.
And effect on other people?
Oh, they swoon with pleasure and joy.
That's what I wanted. I think that's good enough to do. It originally is a spiritual power given by God, but currently it's personal quality or gifts that enable you to impress and influence your chums and non-chums. And as Anne says, the Kennedy family was supposed to possess this particular attribute.
I always thought what we need now is a word that is the opposite of that, for utterly charmless people. There should be a word like charisma.
Denis Norden. Denis Norden, free rider. One with a hyphen between. Free rider.
Rider. Well, if every 5 theorems you bought from Euclid, you've got a free rider. We're getting so terribly up to date, Jack. I think this is almost up to Jack Kerouac. Is it the chap who doesn't buy his round of drinks?
In a sense, that's absolutely right. But if you think of yourself as a member of Equity, you'll probably get a...
He's a non-union member.
That's what I wanted. 1.5. All right, David Franklin. Syndrome.
Oh, this is right down my street. I've been president for years of the British Society of Hypochondriacs. And every year we give an award to the best member of the society. We call it the Syndrome of the Year. It's a running together. The syn means together. Okay. As in synthesis or synagogue.
Oh, quite right.
That's right, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And the drome means the running bit. It's a collection of symptoms that indicate a particular condition in a patient.
Absolutely brilliant. That's fine. Yes, well done. That was the absolutely strict answer. It can be a sort of characteristic pattern of symptoms, or rather more loosely, almost any behaviour pattern at all where things run together. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, kitsch, K-I-T-S-C-H.
It means something which is a bit sort of sweet and too sweet, in rather sort of poor taste.
2 marks. It's something in the arts which is pretentious or inferior or, as Dilys quite rightly said, in bad taste. In a word, more or less, trash. It isn't new. I remember it in Berlin right back in the 1930s, but it's come up again as a with-it word. Frank Muir, uptight.
I'm just wondering whether my music could be called a camp concert.
As long as it's not
something
kitsch,
that you have to be sure your chandelier is. It's an American expression, I think, and it means uptight. It means to be very worried, to have your nerves screwed up to a state of expectancy of disaster or disapproval.
2 marks. There may be some subtleties of meaning which have escaped me and even Frank, but tense, wound up, in a nervy state, and it is American in origin. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, we fairly close score at this point in the game. David Franklin, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir are leading by 2 marks. Well, now it's Steve Brace's turn.
Yes, right, back to musical matters. One of my earliest memories of any kind is of sitting on a rather high piano stool at home, playing away for my own amazement, and wishing I could reach the pedals with my feet. Unfortunately, to reach them, I had to get off the stool, and then I couldn't reach to play the piano. Life's very hard when you're little, as you know. Anyway, it sets me wondering what your earliest musical memory might be. 2 marks to each of you, and you've got the marks in advance. 2 marks to each of you for divulging your earliest musical memory. Ian.
Well, I had a Scottish grandfather who was rather an expert at entertaining small boys, and we lived in London, and he used to come down to visit us. And I remember one Sunday afternoon it was, I suppose I was about 5 or 6, and we were left alone together, and by tea time, he had taught me 3 basic chords on the piano and a little song to go with them. And the song went... Old Mother Hubbard, for she went to the cupboard for something to quench her thirst. When she got there, the cupboard was bare, for her old man had been there first. Oh, my dear friends, be careful. Oh, be careful, and always get there first.
Yeah, thank you. Anne, what about your earliest musical memory?
Mine's so sordid by comparison. When I was about 7, my piano teacher refused to go on teaching me because I bit my nails. But I must think if I can go back earlier. Yes, when I was about 5, I think, doing the gallop at the end of dancing class. And they'd say, now, girls, the teacher would say, fold up your sashes. Now, boys, don't get rough. Off we go. Will you sing a gallop for me? Bumpity, bumpity, bumpity.
Yes. Anyway, that's 2 for you, because you're all going to get 2 marks, as I said. Dennis, an early musical memory from you.
Well, we used to go down to Brighton from Hackney, my father and my Uncle Alfie. And we used to have a clapped-out old car, which my father used to tie together with string. I don't know how old I was very, very young, and they used to sing comic songs in the front while I sat being sick at the back. And there was one song that went, Multi Palabra, the Omi of the Kaiser, tickle me on Karina, she was a mouldy chap. Oh, she wore a belt whenever she felt a pain in a tiddly push. A chemical vest to save her chest from cannoning off the cush. She took quinine and chlorid of lime to save her tiddly pop. And so she became a travelling doctor shop.
Brighton must have been such an anticlimax after that.
That was before the bypass.
I think we're going to hear a David Franklin story now for the first time. It doesn't concern Blindboard. David, your earliest musical memory, please.
I thought this was going to be a nice Christmas. Well, actually, it's my first performance in public. Would you like to hear the song that I sang?
No, indeed.
Watching the trains come in, watching the trains come in, we used to hold each other's hand as only lovers understand. Watching the trains come in, hearing the porters shout, and when we have watched all the trains come in, we watch all the trains go out. That is my contribution to our trip down memory lane.
Thank you. Dilys Powell, you're a Welsh woman, so of course you must have some very strong early musical memory. What was it for you?
Well, I've been trying to persuade myself since I was asked that my first musical memory was of my family. When I was a little bit too small to sing, my father and my sister and my brothers all singing Where the Bee Sucks, There Suck I. But that's not true. Frankly, my first, it's terrible to admit it, my first memory was of it was in the days when one had people in the kitchen, you know, not just me in the kitchen, other people in the kitchen. And somebody in the kitchen was singing, hey, Charlie, I've lost the leg of my drawers.
Lovely and so genuine. It's just what a little girl would remember, isn't it? Frank, how about you?
At the age of 7, I went in for an amateur singing contest at Broadstairs Beach. Uncle Mac's Minstrels it was, and I was after the pail of toffees, which was the prize. It looked an enormous pail in those days. I suppose it was about 3 inches by 2 now. And I've got a photograph of myself winning this contest, taken on one of those cardboard box cameras, black brownies, with when you press the trigger, a safety pin moved across. There was a heavy clunk. And you wound it and took it to the chemist. And I stood up there in my rather long shorts, my pockets bulging, and I looked revolting. I was fat and spotty. And I had, my front teeth were missing entirely. And this sort of ghastly lump of boyhood. I stood up and sang, tell me, Tondileo, wild jungle flower. I won the toffees and I couldn't eat them.
Well, So much for your earliest musical memories. Let's see how you get on with some rather more recent musical experiences, namely musical shows, films, stage musicals, that kind of thing. A little extract first, and then a two-part question for each of you. Ian, listen.
Today I move from immigrant to high society. Now, you may call that luck, and you may call it fortune, but me, myself, I call it...
Ian, what does he call it, and who is he?
I know who he is. It's Tommy Steele.
Yes, that's 1 mark out of 2.
And it's the happiest millionaire, and it's one of those things that's halfway between a cockeyed optimist and a supercalifragilistic superalidocious. It says something
I think Denis has got it, nearly.
Something
osity.
Something osity.
He talked about fortune in that line.
Fortuosity.
Yes, good enough, I think, don't you? 2, yes. Fortuosity by Tommy Steele from The Happiest Millionaire. And Scott James, here's yours.
I always used to fancy then he'd be one of those godlike kind of men, with a giant brain and a noble head, like the heroes both in the books I'd read.
And that was Cleo Lane singing. Who came along at that point, and who wrote the lyric?
Oh, you're telling me that, are you? I thought it was a man singing. I haven't the slightest idea.
Ah, well, your gentleman friends on either side will help.
Honestly, it's no good even mind making a wild guess. Come on.
Well,
Ian,
say it. Don't write it down. Say it. Don't be bashful. Bill. Bill came along, and I think the chap the other side of you, Anne, knows who wrote the lyric.
P.G. Woodhouse.
Yes. Question, though, since the question was addressed to Anne Scott James, do we give her 2 out of 2?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
We're a team, we're a team.
Fair enough. Team effort, all right. Yes, 2 out of 2. Bill by P.G. Woodhouse, who wrote the lyric. Denis, here's yours.
Sometimes in the morning when shadows are deep, I lie here beside you just watching you sleep. And sometimes I whisper what I'm thinking of. My cup runneth over.
With what, Denis, and from which show?
Well, it has to be with love, because if the word of in the line before it's... Yeah, I think this is the only song that sort of made anything from... Now, what was it called? It was based on a play called The Four Post. It was called I Do, I Do.
That's right. My cup runneth over from I Do, I Do. Yes, 2 for you. David, here's a likely sounding lad.
He might be a champ of the heavyweights, or a fella that sells you glue, or president of the United States. That'd be all right, too.
That'd be all right for whom and in which show, David?
It's Carousel.
Says your mate.
It's a carousel, and it's the fellow, I think, talking about what is sun. If it's a girl, he's going to be great. She's going to be great. And if it's a son...
This is David disguising his voice as Frank.
Did you get all that?
Yes, thank you. Yes. I knew it already, as a matter of fact.
Is it right?
Do you know the name of the boy?
Not Bill again.
Yes, Bill.
I got a mark.
My boy. My boy Bill, he'll be tall and as tough as a tree, and so on. The soliloquy from Carousel. The singer there was Vince Hill, incidentally, and you've got 2 marks, David. Dilys, here's some music for you.
Sounds to me like the Music Man, is it?
No, it's not.
It's not.
No, that's a military style, but it's a welcome to something or other, and I want to know welcome to what and whose book started it all?
Welcome.
Name.
Oh, somebody in the audience has told you in a very loud voice.
It's cabaret.
It's cabaret.
Welcome. I really can't give you that, can I? But let's see if you can get the other marker. Welcome to the cabaret. Yes, willkommen. Now, whose book started it all?
Christopher Isherwood's book started it, then it went on to John Van Ruten's play, and it went on to a very, very inferior film directed by Henry Cornelius, and now it's a musical directed by Bob Fosse, with Judy Garland's daughter, Lisa Glenn.
I think the only thing you've left me to tell is that Isherwood's book was called Berlin Stories.
I'll tell you another thing, that the play I Am a Camera was reviewed by one critic who wrote, "Me no liker."
Not me.
How many are you going to give them?
Oh, only one, because she didn't get cabaret, you see, unfortunately. Frank, for you, a wistful little song.
What do you get when you fall in love? A guy with a pin to burst your bubble. That's what you get for all your trouble. I never fall in love again. I'll never fall in love again.
Frank, which show, which composer, please?
It's, the composer is Bert Bacharach.
Yes.
What's he composed? What shows is he?
Well, this is...
Oh, yeah, it's the musical version of a shop at Sly Corner called Premises.
Jack, your turn.
Well, this is a round of origins and derivations, and what I want to know from members of the team is, first of all, what the present meaning of the word or expression is, but then how they came to have that meaning originally. 2 marks again. Ian Wallace, The Curse of Scotland.
I think it's the unwillingness of English league football teams to release their players to play for internationals for Scotland.
Goes back a bit further than that.
A bit further back. This is the Nine of Diamonds.
Jolly good. And why?
Because the Nine of Diamonds is said to resemble the coat of arms of the Earl of Stair.
Well done. And why did people not like him?
Because he was at least 50%. One has to be very careful making a remark like this when we are transmitting to Scotland. I don't know what percentage of the blame he would have for the massacre of Glencoe.
Well done.
But part of it anyway.
Very Scott James. Canteen.
What is it and what it comes from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is a place where you ask for a fresh cup of tea and the cup comes with a lipstick already built into it. On the side. The origin is camp, I think. I think it's a sort of military mess.
Cantina in
That's what I want.
In Italy, there's something to do with wine tasting. Yes. The Scena di Cantina is where they taste the wine. Down
where would that be in?
Well, in a wine cellar.
That's exactly what I wanted. 2 marks. Just to set it out in order, cantina, a cellar, in Italy usually a wine cellar. Then it became a wet or dry canteen in barracks of soldiers. Later a set of cooking utensils and carriers of liquid refreshment. And finally, as Anne said, a place of inferior feeding in factory, school, or even BBC. And now, Denis Norden, box the compass.
Ah. That's one of the 3 things I learnt at Scouts. The other 2 doing a dirty version of the Highland Grenadiers and how to conduct old ladies halfway across a It means reading all the points of the compass right the way around. What evades me now is how many there are. I could work it out if you give me but I think it's 32.
Well done.
32 points of the compass. It means being able to reel them off. We used to get hauled out the tent. At camp, there's that word again. During scout camp.
Dennis, what's it mean figuratively?
To box the compass means to gallop off madly in all directions, doesn't it? I don't really know. What does it mean figuratively?
You're about halfway there.
It means to go to all points.
And back again.
And back again. To go right the way round.
1.5. Dead right, to name the 32 points of the compass in their correct order and then do it backwards, which is much harder. But therefore, it comes to mean to reverse your views, whether they're political or other kinds of views, and end up at the point from which you started. And of the wind, it means rapidly blowing in sequence from every quarter of the compass, which must be extremely uncomfortable. 1.5. David Franklin, Mountebank.
Doesn't this have something to do with the literal meaning of the two halves of the words? Yes. It's obviously not an English word.
No.
Italian. Yes. The first half of it means to climb up on.
Yes.
And the bank is obviously a bunker. Just to satisfy Steve, I sang the part of bunker at Kleinborg.
You worked it.
The other members of the cast were respectively called Duncano, Macbetto, and the one that I love best of all, Macduffo. Back to work. A chap who mounted a bunco, which is a bench, got up to address people, and was therefore doing a petticoat line.
That's right. He's selling something.
Selling things.
That'll do. Well done. It means a chap who stands on a platform to advertise probably quack medicines or tricks or wares, going around from fairs and markets and roundabout. And it can mean the bank or platform on which he displayed his wares while standing on it at the same time. And he did a bit of juggling as well. And David is quite right. It's the Italian Montebanco or the French Saltimbanque. 2 marks. Dilys Powell. Cinque Ports. C-I-N-Q-U-E. Cinque Ports.
Well, it means all those harbours, some of which are silted up, round the Kent coast.
Mm-hmm. Have a shot at some of them.
Rye.
Yes.
Winchelsea.
You've added the 2 which weren't in the original 5. So. Sorry?
Sandwich.
Yes, sandwich is a good one.
Deal. There's a
not deal.
No, not deal. Not deal, no.
No deal.
No. Hastings?
Yes.
Hastings.
Yes, that's good. And there's one very obvious one you've missed.
St. Leonard's.
The most obvious of all.
Dover.
Well, you've given me 5, and it's 5 out of 7 in the end. These are the 5 seaports, Hastings, Sandwich, Dover, Rumney, and Hythe, which lay opposite France, and were granted special privileges so that, in turn, they provided ships and men to defend the Channel against the French and others. And it meant 5 harbours, but Winchelsea and Rye were added in later on, and they became Cinque Ports too. Frank Muir, Mohawks. M-O-H-O-C-K-S. Mohawks.
Mohawks or Mohawks?
You can have either, or both.
Thank you. Well, sounds like the name of a Red Indian tribe.
Yeah, originally, right.
Which indeed it was. And it was a name given to violent gangs of youngish people who roamed the streets, particularly of London, if not only of London, at the beginning of the 18th century.
Hold on.
They're mentioned in Swift. And they were probably political. And Swift thought they were Whigs because he was a Tory. And they probably were political. They were aristocratic. They were young bloods, and they used to upend women, which was much nastier in those days because it was before underclothes were invented. And they slit night watchmen's noses, and they rolled people down hills in barrels. And it was probably to influence the mob vote, because one persuaded people to vote in those days, Queen Anne and George I, by violence. And it was Sir Robert Walpole who cleaned up the whole electioneering system and substituted bribery.
After that display of learning, I'm going to give Frank 3 out of 2.
I'll take it. Bribery.
Now back to music. At this point, we combine the members of each team, get them to put their heads together over pencil and paper, and see if they can name the tunes in a quick medley that I'm going to play on the piano. 6 tunes, 6 marks available, therefore. But only if you get the correct name of the tune. There's a medley for each team. So this first is the medley for Ian, Anne, and Denis. See if you can name all the tunes between you. 6 tunes. Let's see how you can get on. All chip in together.
I got 3. I bet we got 3 the same, right?
You got the first one?
I've got You'd Be So Nice to Come Home
There was
To.
a couple of songs before that. Anybody get the first
I got
one?
Dearly Beloved.
Yes, that's one.
Then there's one I didn't get.
Yeah.
Yes, and I felt I should, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Then if You'd Be So Nice to Come Home
That's the only
To.
one I knew of the whole lot.
Yeah.
If Those Lips Could Only Speak.
I think it's called Only a Beautiful Picture.
Yeah, if those lips could only speak is correct. That was at the end.
Right.
That's right. You missed 2 in between, near the end there.
Yeah.
Artist's
Yes.
Life Walk.
Artist's Life, good, yes, or Constellation, yes, very good. Before that.
Well, that leaves the second one.
And the fourth. I'll have to tell you, I think the second was part of the verse of Almost Like Being in Love. What a day this has been. The Miner's Dream of Home was the one you missed. So you've got 4 out of 6. Fair enough. Now to the other team. That's David, Dilys and Frank. Your medley. Right, anybody got the first one?
Beethoven.
Yes, which?
Beethoven 6.
Yes, thank you. All Pastoral Symphony, correct. Right. Next tune, anybody get it?
Roses of Picardy.
No, there was one before then, but Roses of Picardy gets you a mark.
Well, you tuned in on Roses of Picardy. It's all Roses of Picardy.
Yeah. Carry on. After that, I saw you writing the next one down.
Road to Mandalay.
On the
Road to Mandalay.
Yes, thank you, on the Road to Mandalay.
And I wrote down The Sunny Side of the Street.
That's the next one.
Yes, a little out of character, but you're right, yes.
And I also wrote down the S&S for E.
Or, being interpreted...
The Stars and Stripes.
Forever, yes, that's right. You got 5. The one you missed was from Choo Chin Chow, Anytime's Kissing Time, which was the second tune in. Yeah. 5 out of 6. Very good.
And now the final round, in which Denis and Frank will tell you the story behind how some famous songs came to be written. And this round will be judged by the audience and the amount of applause given to the 2 stories. First of all, Denis.
Well, Irving Berlin, as you know, wrote quite a few songs that were based on girls' names. Marie, Mandy, Me and My Melinda, Polly, Pretty Polly, Polly with a Past. That one might not be so familiar. But he also wrote one song which was based on the name, not of a girl, but of a married lady, Mrs. B. White.
Denis, I'm sorry, I must chip in. I've never heard of a song called Mrs.
Well, just hang on. I'll tell you about it. I've got some music in front of you, because everybody's sung this toe-tapping tune, but very few people know who Mrs. B. White was or why Irving Berlin chose to immortalize her. Well, in appearance, Mrs. B. White was not particularly impressive. To be brutally frank, she had a face like a kneecap. And as for her figure, that was distributed on the Volkswagen principle. In other words, most of the bodywork was at the rear. But though her features were plain, she was strong in heart and had a kind of interior tranquility. In fact, you could describe her as one of those women who'd look a hell of a sight better inside out. Now, perhaps it's unfair to hold a woman's appearance against her, although I certainly wouldn't have fancied it held against me. But what you could hold against her was the overbearing way she treated her husband. Because while, as I've indicated, Mrs. White was a large lady, in fact, she had the kind of shape that could very easily qualify her nowadays for employment as a roadblock. Her husband, Bob White, was very slight in build and so frail-looking that she often used to refer to him as effeminate, which indeed, compared to her, he was. But that was no excuse for the kind of humiliation that she used her superior strength for to inflict upon poor Bob. In fact, in no way, and not for one moment, did Bob, in all his married life, receive a moment of tenderness or thoughtfulness from her. Even the wedding presents, those his and her bathroom towels. She used to dry herself with the hers towel and stand on the hill. Even on their wedding night, he had to plead with her, "Please, dear, won't you at least give me a good night kiss?" And all she answered was, "Well, perhaps I'll kiss you good night in the morning." And he said, "Well, why can't you kiss me now?" And she said, "Because I'm not facing that way." It was all such sheer misery that Bob, poor Bob White, became pitied even by his colleagues. Now, did I mention that he played in an orchestra? And when musicians pity you, you're really in trouble. In fact, when one of his fellow musicians asked him, "Doesn't your marriage have any physical side?" all poor Bob could answer is, "Well, she hits me now and again." So pitiable did he become that a composer called Johnny Mercer tried to restore his sense of identity by writing a song which was called Bob White. I don't know if you remember that song. "I was talking to the whippoorwill, he said you had a corny trill, Bob White." You remember it, don't you, Ian? You were. Well, unfortunately it didn't work, because that song only made things worse for Bob. Because when Mrs. White heard it, she became so livid with jealousy that her behaviour towards him became, if anything, even worse. Not content with things like using one of his skis as an ironing board, she resorted to really foul tactics, like putting his dentures in the dishwasher, using his tennis racket to strain the chips. So finally, Bob, in despair, was driven to approach the famous Irving Berlin and implore him, "Please, Mr. Berlin, the only thing that'll save me from complete destruction is if you could possibly write a song that's based on my wife's name." That, ladies and gentlemen, is what the great-hearted Irving Berlin did. So now you know the true story behind that evergreen melody that we all know, immortalized by Bing Crosby, Mrs. B. White.
Dennis, I still don't know a song called Mrs. B. White.
But you're supposed to be, you are a pianist and a musician, and you don't know the song called Mrs. B. White. Well, look, if you just play that bit of music in front of you, Frank and I will sing the song Mrs. B. White for you.
Mrs. B. White. Well, they fooled me, but now another famous song came to be written, and we have to go to Frank Muir to find out how.
My song is one of those songs which are written about a period of time, when the poppies bloom again, when I take my sugar to tea, and mine is that one that you all are so familiar with, rather Eastern flavour. It's when a sheik hums. Gad, it was hot in Egypt that afternoon in 1893. As Lady Fanshawe remarked to the Dowager Duchess of Egham, "It's enough to melt the medals off a lead soldier." In Shepherd's Hotel, the bar was full of shepherds. Upstairs in the main suite, Lady Fanshawe sat quietly doing her crochet work. She was titting a tatfa. She put that down and picked up picked up her wool work and tattered a tit fur. Opposite her sat her young niece, Lady Diana, a slim, elegant, petulant English rose. Lady Diana had been born with a silver apostle spoon in her mouth. Her parents were not only rich, but pious. After 3.5 hours, Lady Diana broke the silence. "Oh, Auntie," she said, 6 months gone and still no word from Captain Butterwick. "You're what?" said her. Stabbing her thumb with her crochet hook. "No, Auntie, Captain Butterwick, my fiancé, has been gone 6 months and still no word. He hasn't written, hasn't anything. He's forgotten me, Aunt. We were to be wed and nothing, not even a word. Awful just sitting here waiting. Another hour passed and her aunt said, putting down her tit fur, half tatted, she said, "Don't just sit there, child. Engage yourself in some occupation. Go and have your ears pierced." "No, it's so boring, Auntie." "Auntie, I know what to do. I'll saddle up my mare and I'll ride through the desert. The wind in my hair, I'm sure, will cool me down and take my mind away from my situation." And she slipped her boyish figure into a silk shirt. She left a fair gap and put on her jodhoppers, and she climbed on her pony and galloped fiercely across the sand. For mile after mile she galloped, her lovely chestnut hair blowing in the breeze. Although the air was still so hot, it seemed cool to her as she rode, and suddenly her steed stumbled. He stumbled over an Englishman sitting in a deck chair with a knotted handkerchief, and the horse rode on for a while, but it had hurt its leg, and then it stumbled, and Lady Diana was flung to the sand. Luckily, she only fell on the soft part, and when her head hit the sand, she swooned away. When she came to, suddenly the scene was changed. It was the sky had gone damask, and it was cooler and very variegated in colour, and there was a faint smell. And she realised that she was inside a very richly panoplied tent, and she was on satin cushions. Where am I? And as if in answer, a small native orchestra played da 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 da. How strange! And suddenly the tent flap was flung open, and this splendid figure entered. He stopped for a moment in the tent flap and disengaged the second string from his Adam's apple. Strode forward, clad in these lovely flowing robes, a burnous on his head, immensely tall man he was. "My dear," he said, "I am Sheikh Abu Ben Nevis." She looked up at him and said, "But thank you for rescuing me, but what are you going to do with me now?" And he said, "What am I going to do with you?" And suddenly the tent was flung open. There stood a British officer, rather dumpy and short, but that's irrelevant to the story. There was a flash of a white fist as his fist connected with the Sheikh's jaw. "Captain Butterwick," said Diana. He said, "I'm sorry I was taken so long to get here, old gal. The captain of the boat was rather young. He turned right at Land's End instead of left. It became the polar route. But he said, thank heavens I got here in time. Do you realise I've saved your life?" And he gathered her up in his arms and galloped with her back across the sands towards Cairo. After about half an hour, he slowed down. And I bought a horse, and he laid her... have a rest. And he laid her, die, he said, and he laid her out. He said, "I got you just in time, because you know what it means when a sheik hums." "No." "Oh, you foolish girl. Every girl who goes up from England should know what it means when a sheik hums. It means he's going to... What? I can't say it. said, well, demonstrate it. His eyes lit up. He said, right, I might. There's many a good fiddle played on an old dune, he said. He got down beside her, and suddenly he sat up. She said, now what? He said, what a wonderful song that would make, if only I could write it. She said, what, poor frustrated girl? She said, doubly frustrated in one afternoon. She said, what? He said, when a she comes, and he got out his paybook and his pencil, and he wrote that famous song, which you all know, and you all sung many, many times. And that is how the song came to be written. When a she comes.
No, I really must register to the joint chairman a strong protest, because we're supposed to have done these stories about famous and well-known songs, and I have never heard of a song called When a Sheik Hums.
May I interject a comment there?
Well, do so by all means, if you think it will extricate you from the predicament into which you have put yourself.
I think so, yes, sir. I do think so. Mr. Ace, would you play that piece of music, and I will sing it. When a sheik hums, round the mountain, when a sheik hums, round the mountain, when a sheik hums.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins story contest, but the victory for the entire contest goes to David Franklin, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir by 1.5 marks.
And from all of us in this combined edition, we wish you a very happy holiday and goodbye.
Taking part in My Word, It's My Music were Steve Race, Jack Longland and Scott James, Dilys Powell, David Franklin, Ian Wallace, Frank Muir and Denis Norden. The questions were compiled by Jack Longland and Steve Race, and the programme was produced for the BBC by Tony Shryan.